augment his forces. Now Clark wants to go over and do the same thing at Vincennes on the Wabash River, and the same thing happens. We take some of them with us. They tell everybody how great we are, and now they're all on our side. There's one more thing Clark does at Cahokia. Remember, the whole reason for his campaign is to stop the Indian raids in Kentucky. So Cahokia, for like millennia, had been a center of Indian culture. They had trade routes that went from Canada down into South America that all went through Cahokia. It was just this legendary center of Indian trade and culture. So now we're in control of it. So in addition to being right across the river from St. Louis, it's also key because it's a very central sacred spot for the Indians. So Clark calls a council of all the local Indian tribes, all of which were hostile to the Americans, and he decides he's going to make a direct appeal. In addition to cutting off their source of funding, he's going to make a direct appeal to them to stop raiding Kentucky. And Clark always thought that there were two ways to treat Indians, the British way and the French way. The way the British saw the Indians is they thought they were primitive children, and they couldn't understand complex thought. So you had to treat them and talk to them like children, and you had to buy their allegiance with trade goods. The French, on the other hand, saw the Indians as being equals, and they treated them as such. Clark always thought that the French way of treating the Indians was the better way. So he calls these Indians together, being very careful to disguise the number of troops that he had, because if the Indians remember, these Indians are all hostile. And if they find out how weak Clark is, they might just attack him on the spot. So he's always very careful to never reveal the amount of troops he really had to the Indians. But here's this 25-year-old guy with no military training, and he intentionally surrounds himself in Indian country in the midst of all these hostile tribes who greatly outnumber him, and he decides, I'm just going to threaten and intimidate him. So he has two wampum belts made up, and wampum belts, we mistake what they are today. We think that they were used as currency. They weren't. Wampum belts were just a pictographic reference. Sometimes they were a solid color, sometimes they would have designs with colored beads made into them. It might tell the history of a tribe, it might signify a particular treaty, it might tell of a significant battle, but that's what they were. They were pictographs that represented things. So a red wampum belt signified war for obvious reasons, and a white wampum belt signified peace. When the Indians decided to start raiding Kentucky at the behest of the British, they had taken up the red